Trump has once again made a comment that is sending our country into a frenzy, where he claims that the US has been subsidizing Canada for $200 billion a year.
I love Canada. I love the people of Canada. I have many friends in Canada. But, you know, the United States can't subsidize a country for $200 billion a year.
At the same time, Mark Carney has held an emergency press conference with Premier of BC, David Eby, to hold his fracturing party together in the midst of his controversial deal with Alberta. And Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives have recently released a new ad where Pierre Poilievre sets the record straight on Canada's economic sovereignty and the Conservatives' plan to build this country while running. And people are talking about it. But before we get into all of that, if you love this country and if you think God has his hand firmly over this country and you love Canada and you end up enjoying this video, feel free to subscribe and hit the like button now. Let's get on into it. Now, I'm actually going to let Trump speak for himself, and after the clip plays, I will give you guys the research I was able to dig up based on the data that is presented.
In the case of Canada, we're spending $200 billion a year to subsidize Canada. I love Canada. I love the people of Canada. I have many friends in Canada. But, you know, the United States can't subsidize a country for $200 billion a year. We don't need their cars. We don't need their energy. We don't need their lumber. We don't need anything that they give. We do it because we want to be helpful, but it comes a point when you just can't do that. You have to run your own country. And to be honest with you, Canada only works as a state. It doesn't. We don't need anything they have. As a state, it would be one of the great states anyway. This would be the most incredible country visually. But why should we subsidize another country for $200 billion? It costs us $200 billion a year. And again, we don't need their lumber. We don't need their energy. We have more than they do. We don't need anything. We don't need their cars. I'd much rather make the cars here. And there's not a thing that we need. Now, there'll be a little disruption, but it won't be very long.
Now, I couldn't find exactly what Trump meant by subsidizing Canada for $200 billion. Everyone seems to think he's referring to our trade deficit, which, according to every reputable major source I could find, was only about $63.3 billion. So if he is referring to that number specifically, then he's just factually incorrect on that, unless he's getting some numbers from some kind of internal source. But I couldn't find anything remotely relating to the $200 billion that he's claiming that they're subsidizing us for. But I think the major takeaway here, and the thing that I think people are forgetting in this discussion, is that whether or not it's a $200 billion deficit or a $63 billion deficit, a trade deficit with any country is bad for the nation that is producing said deficit. And the fact is whether or not you agree with the tariffs, whether or not you agree with his language or want to talk about the semantics of the numbers, 200 billion, 63 billion, the fact is that he is thinking about America first. And I, of course, as a Canadian, don't like the repercussions of that, but I understand that in a dog-eat-dog world, thinking about your country first is what any successful, smart, strong leader needs to do. So, of course, I don't like everything Trump has done, but we need to remember that he's not the president of Canada. He's the president of the United States, and he's thinking about that country before ours. I don't think there's anyone in this country, any conservative certainly, that likes the remarks necessarily that he's made towards Canada. But you have to remember that he's not the president of this country, he's the president of his. But here's the facts of the matter. A trade deal with the US is no longer just beneficial for Canada, it is a necessity. It is now crucial. Now, if you weren't aware, the CEO of Laval International gave a nonpartisan testimony before a parliamentary committee on industry, I believe a few weeks ago now, where he laid out very clearly that if the Prime Minister does not seek a deal with the United States in the next couple of months, almost 2 million jobs could be lost in Canada's manufacturing sector heading down south to the States and even Mexico. And Mark Carney ran on getting a deal done with this US administration, but I can't even remember the last time I've heard him talk about actually trying to get a deal done. And he's been going all over the world talking about economic sovereignty and distancing ourselves from the US. And while it's nice in theory, it doesn't work in practice, because the flow of money is not actually controlled in a capitalist society, which we live, by government. It is controlled by the free market. It is controlled by where companies believe it is smartest to invest their time and resources. And there's no trade deal that Mark Carney can sign that will change the fact that right now the US has a much better market and a booming economy that is much more sustainable long term for any company wanting to build roots or grow roots anywhere. And so now, after a year of a failed elbows up campaign, 111,000 jobs have been lost just since New Year's Eve of 5 months ago. And now almost 2 million jobs, if not more, are going to be lost if Mark Carney does not pursue a trade deal with the United States very, very soon. And this is not fear-mongering. These are facts. This is the situation we're in. I know there's a lot of Carney supporters out there who are frustrated with constant conservative criticism, who just want to feel hopeful about the situation Canada's in. But the facts is that there's nothing to feel hopeful about other than the fact that we have a really good people and a really good working class and a really good history. But outside of that, the situation we're in is very, very dire right now. And while I love hope, and it's important to be hopeful, and I've rooted my hope in Jesus Christ, at the same time, we have to be factual. Because if we can't be factual, then things are only bound to get worse. Because we need to be able to face the facts with an open heart so that we can change for the better when those facts maybe aren't what we want to hear. And if you still believe that this is all Trump's fault, take a look at this. The UK, the EU, Indonesia, Switzerland, Argentina are all countries, just to name a few, along with Guatemala as well, I believe Cambodia, and most recently China, just to name a few countries, Switzerland, Liechtenstein, all of these countries, the US has sat down with and made a deal with just in Trump's second term. So if the US was willing to sit down with China, its historically greatest rival for the past 30 years now, then surely it is willing to sit down with Canada, and maybe it's not something we can any longer blame Trump for. Maybe it's not something that Trump is doing. Maybe instead it's something we're doing. Maybe it's something that we need to change. Maybe if we had a prime minister that took his job seriously and actually started to build these national interest projects he loves to talk about, and we'll get into that more in a minute, to actually build some leverage, then maybe we would actually get somewhere. But Mark Carney has not even called up Trump in months, according to people even closest to him. Now 2 million people have to lose their jobs, and all of Canada takes a hit because he's just not willing to do his job. But speaking of Mark Carney and his national interest projects, I'm sure you're all thinking, well, what about the pipeline deal with Alberta he just made recently? Isn't that a national interest project? What about the mine he announced in Quebec just a couple days ago? Aren't these national interest projects? Well, the Quebec mine is something that's been in the works since February of 2021, got its funding deal for $411 million in December of 2024. Mark Carney has contributed absolutely nothing to that project. I covered it in my last video. And he steps in and decides he's going to be the one to do this big photo op, big press conference to announce this project when he actually had very, very little, if anything at all, to actually do with this project. And as for the Alberta deal, well, that is our next story. As you may know, many people close to him are not happy with this deal, not least of which is his good buddy, Premier of BC, David Eby. Now, ignoring for just a moment the fact that this pipeline is not going to even start being built until September of 2027, which is insane considering that in Europe they were able to build pipelines and national interest projects in months, and it's taken Mark Carney over 2.5 years just to get shovels in the ground. We'll cover that more in detail in a little bit. The fact is that Mark Carney's cabinet is completely falling apart at this news. People in this cabinet, like Stephen Guilbeault, who have been environmental activists for many years, are completely outraged and considering the possibility of leaving depending on how this deal goes, which already in and of itself tells me that Mark Carney is probably not even going to build this pipeline, but I suppose that's just speculation. And why do I say that? Well, because right now Mark Carney has a manufactured majority government. He's losing 2 MPs this summer, which means he will have only 1 MP, enough to make a majority, and if he loses Stephen Guilbeault or any other MPs, he will no longer have his majority. Now, as I've been saying, and as other political commentators have been saying for a few months now, is that Mark Carney has a very broad but very delicately manufactured coalition of supporters. He has some of the environmental activists and the far left liberals from the Trudeau era, or that maybe moved over from the NDP because they were scared of a Pierre Poilievre government for whatever reason. That's one side of his coalition. On the other side, you have the business liberals and the economically savvy liberals. These are the people who don't really care about party politics, but maybe they have a lot of investments, or maybe they own a business, and they simply want to see the economy do well first and foremost. I mean, of course, they're human beings. Of course, they have other issues that they care about, but that's kind of their primary concern. And then kind of in the middle, but more leaning left, you have the kind of elbows up anti-Trump liberals. And there's other groups as well, but those are sort of like the big 4, I would say. And in making this deal with Alberta Premier Danielle Smith to get this pipeline deal done, he is trying to appease the business liberals and the Alberta separatist movement, which, after an unelected judge from the Trudeau era shut down 700,000 voices, I don't think that sentiment's really going to go anywhere. This deal might be a little too late. And that's coming from a federalist like myself. And what people have been saying for many months now, myself included, but other political pundits, I suppose, have been saying is that when you have a delicate, fragile, large coalition of supporters, it is increasingly difficult to appease them all at the same time. And I've predicted for a very long time now that the downfall of Mark Carney will be caused by a rupture in his coalition and a fragmenting of his voter base. We saw this with Brian Mulroney when he could not, who was a conservative prime minister, by the way, who could not appease all of the members of his broad coalition. He could not appease the voters in Quebec, so they created and then voted en masse for the Bloc Québécois, and he couldn't appease Western Albertan voters across the prairies, and so they created and voted en masse for Preston Manning's Reform Party. So this is a historical trend, and we're seeing this take place now. His MPs are currently in heated debate, from everything I've seen, about this issue. I mean, if some are threatening to leave if this deal isn't sustainable enough environmentally, then yeah, that's a sign of a fracturing cabinet. And if that's what's happening in cabinet, then you can bet your bottom dollar something even graver is happening in the voter base. And we've seen this. I made a video yesterday where the top story was Mark Carney's approval rating has dropped 6 points just in the last month. And of course, there's other factors: Bill C-22, the expansion of MAID, the 47,000 jobs lost last month, the $67 billion deficit, plenty of unpopular policies that are not just unpopular, but they're very unpopular. Like, we're talking 70-30, 80-20 issues, despite what the media narrative might want you to think. And so if this continues and Mark Carney can't rebound from this Alberta deal, this could be very well the beginning of the fracturing of his voter base and his voter coalition. But I guess we'll have to see. And as always, I will keep you guys as up to date and informed as I can on all things related to Canadian politics. But before I go any further, I just want to educate everyone on the obvious fact. According to NOAA data available publicly via the extremeweatherwatch.com website, if you actually compare the temperature, the highest recorded temperature in Vancouver from last year, 2025, and the highest recorded temperature in Vancouver 100 years ago, it's actually 5 degrees colder last year than it was 100 years ago. In Toronto, it's only the highest recorded temperature of last year was only 1.5 degrees more than the highest recorded temperature 100 years before. So as much as I'm against pollution, and I've always hated pollution, I think most conservatives do, there's also the obvious fact that there's no observable, tangible evidence that things are significantly getting hotter. And on top of that, even if it was, Canada's not even remotely the top polluter. We're far lower on the list. We're much closer to the bottom of the list than the top of the list in terms of polluters. The fact is that the top polluters in the world are the countries that are doing the least about it in Southern and Eastern Asia, and in spots in Africa as well. So I guess what I'm saying is that we have a situation in Canada where a pipeline would bring much needed prosperity and economic relief to our people, and to say no to that because of unreliable statistics and evidence not based in observable reality, or for just the sake of pursuing environmental ideals that might sound nice, I'm sorry, but the reality is that we just can't afford to do that. I would say that is the pretty mainstream conservative stance. Nobody likes pollution, but we live in a day and age where it is that a lot of the information spread about pipelines and that kind of thing are, well, frankly, propaganda, kind of designed to get you to hate those things. But in reality, they're much cleaner than they are portrayed. And we need the economic relief that would be provided by them. But as for our last story of the day, it ties in very nicely, actually, to the last couple of things I've been talking about. And that is that Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives have recently released a new ad that is going viral right now, setting straight the Conservative platform on Canada's economic sovereignty. But what's unique is that Pierre Poilievre has recorded it while running. I'll play a couple clips for you right now.
You ever been out for a run and told yourself that you were running as fast as you could? Nah. If you were being chased by a bear, you could run faster still. Just ask the Germans. They were being chased by a Russian bear. You see, the Germans were relying on Russian gas to power their economy, but then when Putin invaded Ukraine, they realized that was a very dangerous idea. They had to break their dependence on this aggressive neighbor, so they permitted a new LNG import terminal in just 60 days. And then they built it in the following 164 days for a total construction completion time of 194 days. From soup to nuts, the entire thing done, including a pipeline to get the energy to German markets. Good news for them, bad news for Canada, because none of that gas comes from our country. It almost entirely comes from the United States, where they can permit LNG export terminals very quickly. In Canada, it takes 14 years just to get a permit to build the thing, and then there are high carbon taxes that make it unprofitable. Now, all of these taxes and anti-development laws remain in place after a year of Mark Carney, even though he's been in power for twice as long as it took the Germans to build their new terminal. Let's sweep those things away. Get rid of the anti-development laws. Have fast 6-month permitting with no industrial carbon tax so that we can quickly approve those plants and ship Canadian gas using our enormous advantages of cold weather for cheaper liquefaction, abundant supplies, and shorter shipping distances. We just got to get running.
And so I won't spend too much time on this, but I do think objectively this is a good ad and deserves more recognition. And it's kind of in line with what I've been talking about in this video, that Canada needs to build quicker. And he references the statistic that the story that I also referenced, how in Europe, in Germany, when Russia invaded Ukraine, Germany was able to build a national interest project from start to finish in just a few months. And yet Mark Carney will have not even put a shovel in the ground until 2.5 years after he became prime minister. On the promise, on one of many promises, but one of the promises to build Canada strong. That was his whole motto. And build in speeds we haven't seen in generations. Yeah, I'd love to. When are we going to start? And let me be clear, Mark Carney can start at any time. And it wouldn't be the most difficult thing in the world. He wouldn't even really need to pass anything through the House of Commons. He would just need to remove a lot of the regulations that are holding projects back and release a lot of the free enterprise in this country to just build things on their own instead of trying to governmentally micromanage each of one of these projects for some reason. But despite the crazy world going on around us, I still have a ton of hope for this country, for this planet, because I am rooted in the hope of God, the hope of Jesus Christ. I firmly believe he has his hand over this nation. As long as we continue to do our part, I've always encouraged you guys to write to your MPs, write to your senators respectfully if you care at all about any one of these issues, to do our part. I'm trying to do my part by making this YouTube channel, making this video, and if you agree that we still have a bright future ahead of us, hit that subscribe button. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Have a great day.